And thanks very much for your time.
Good evening for you, and good evening to your viewers at home.
Do we know what sort of lies behind this? Do people take advantage of people who have disabilities, or is there something more to it than simply that?
Indeed, people take advantage of people with disabilities, but I think what we need to acknowledge is that in South Africa in general, we have alarming levels of gender-based violence, and that most of our responses tend to respond to the issue as if women were a homogeneous group, and yet we know that there is women with special needs, and I think the disability sector is one of one such subpopulation that needs to be dealt with and taking into consideration their specific needs. What the report tells us is that women with disability are in fact not twice but up to 8 times more likely to experience violence depending on the type and nature of disability that they have. So for instance, if you look at women who are blind or partially sighted, often they are unable to identify the risk as it comes. They are unable to identify, the perpetrator, and often when they go to court, the kind of questioning line is often assumes, is designed for people like you and I. So they get asked questions like, what was he wearing? Did he have a mustache? Was wearing a green jacket, a yellow jacket? And of course, those are things that they would not be able to identify. And the strength of their testimony and evidence lies on, providing information like that. In addition to that, if you look at women with mental disability, when they are raped, sexually violated, and often when they report, they are considered unreliable witnesses, both in courts of law, but even within our communities and society, because we tend to stigmatize mental disability and almost like, wish them away. So those are some of the things that came out of the report. But also quite important was the realization that many of the perpetrators of gender-based violence against women with disability are actually the caregivers themselves. So, women with disability, because of their disability, tend to be dependent.
And trusting.
Yes, and trusting, And because of that, their caregivers tend to take advantage of their position and tend to withhold certain favors, certain services that they actually need, that are critical, for their survival, and use that in exchange for sexual favors.
But how much of an awareness about this, what your report is highlighting, is there, especially among those people who, at least theoretically or hypothetically, have the ability to not only raise awareness but do something by way of, canvassing, the support of law enforcement agencies, but also even changing legislation? I'm talking about parliamentarians, I'm talking about Commission for Gender Equality, the ministry responsible for women and children, and so on. How much of an awareness is there among those key people who actually have the mandate to actually sort of tackle these issues head on?
Vuyo, I would say that there is some level of awareness, but I think what we tend to do, disability in general and disabled people, the plight of disabled people tends to be way down in our list of priorities, except for the constituency itself who try to advocate on their behalf. But because they are such a minority, often their voice is not heard. And in this report, we are trying to amplify the voice of disabled women and say to everybody who's involved, whether it's our families, who themselves, are not adequately equipped to understand different disabilities, our society around, issues around stigma, and myths around, disabled women. So we're trying to say, here is a research piece, So we're not talking about ad hoc information that we get from, the odd woman with disability. Here's a research piece, and let's interrogate and look at what it means to our programs, to our laws, for instance, around, protecting minority groups who tend to be marginalized too.
Of course, at the end of the day, it is, as you say, a reflection on how sick we are as a society.
Absolutely. I mean, to the extent that you use the word sick, Vuyo, I just want to, if you look at women with albinism, there's myths going around that say if you have sex with a woman with albinism, you will have luck. So it's all about charm, yeah? And they get trafficked just for purposes of, people, gamblers and people wanting, to have luck in one form or the other. So that's the extent of how sick we are. But I think what we also need to note is that for as long as our laws and our justice system is also not aware of these issues and does not internalize these issues, these women will continue to be disadvantaged. Because if you walked into a Home Affairs office or a police station today, what are the chances that you will find somebody who can sign language? So if I was a deaf woman and I walked into a police station and I had been sexually assaulted or raped, that it's likely that nobody there will be able to take a statement, at least take a proper statement, so that the case can be, prosecuted properly. So I think those are some of the issues. So it's not just about our communities and how sick we are, but it's also looking at how victim-friendly our criminal justice system is, our health services are, and all our other public services.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming through. And you are indeed correct. We won't be able to pay for a sign language interpreter, but we will pay hundreds of millions of rands to a middleman who wants to sell trains at exorbitant amounts of money. Hlanganisa Institute for Development in Southern Africa Executive Director, Bongiwe Ndondo.